Thanks everyone for coming. Welcome to the day. Welcome to Designing with Imagination and Empathy. My name's Oliver Scofield. We'll do some little introductions before we kick off. I'm a Salesforce architect at the National Audit Office. That's a public sector organisation, independent from government, and it has the job of auditing all the other government departments. A little bit designing in the Salesforce space for around 15 years. I hold 3 certifications at the moment, and we should probably, where's it gone? There we go. We should probably mention the hashtags. Do feel free to use the hashtags today. Shout out to your friends, colleagues, and so on. We will have time for questions at the end, but if we run out of time, which we won't, or if you think of a question later, you can track me down on the social media of your choice, whether that's on the Trailblazer community, on Twitter, or on LinkedIn. Okay, so without any further ado, let's get into it. This will be an interactive session, so you will have the opportunity to engage with your imagination and your empathy. More on that as we go. But we're going to start us off a little gently with some nice definitions, just so that we're all pretty much on the same page. Now, I'm sure that you already have a fair understanding of what imagination and empathy are, but in terms of our design context, what we mean here is essentially we are looking for, in imagination, the generation of new ideas. And these can be in the form of images, concepts, feelings. And we're operating really in our mental spaces within our minds, and it's imaginary. It's not connected to the physical environment. Empathy, and again, you may have a good understanding that means essentially to be aware of somebody else's feelings, but it's a tiny little bit more than that, because what I've got here is a definition which is to be aware of and to mirror somebody else's feelings or experiences as if they were our own. And I'll let you just simmer on that little definition for the moment. Designing, of course, we all know what designing is, but to complete the circle, essentially, yes, it's about to plan or draw the look and function of a product or a solution. So today's session is really about planning the look and function of a solution with new ideas generated from awareness of somebody else's thinking. Somebody else's experiences. This somebody else is our users. And there are many ways we can involve the user in our design process. If we have access to a physical user, we can do all this lovely stuff here on the left. We can ask them questions, invite them to participate in market research and user testing, invite them into focus groups, and even test audiences in film, TV, and advertising. If we don't have access to a physical user, and this might be quite a lot of the time, because essentially you might be remote working, you don't have access to a client site, we are then going to rely much more on our imagination and our empathy. We'll need to draw on our understandings of our target audience. And to help us do this, we use the creation of archetypes and storyboards and other documentation. These things on the right here are going to be the focus of our attention this morning. Before we get into that, we're going to start with a nice exercise. Now, this is an exercise in imagination. Now, you don't need to get up and walk around. There's no acting involved here. What I'm asked after here is essentially to imagine that you're on a beach holiday. Now, if you need to close your eyes to help your imagination, that's fine. But what I want you to do is to start by imagining that the chair that you're sat in at the moment is a deck chair or a sun lounger, and begin to notice how your body changes when you relax and you begin those imaginary thoughts. Think about the sights and sounds as you sit in this beach scenario. Perhaps you sat under a parasol. How hot is it? Ask yourself questions about what you might see and hear and how you feel. Can you hear perhaps the waves lapping on the beach? Are there children playing nearby? What can you see on the horizon? And when you've fully immersed yourself in this imaginary scene, I just want you to take a snapshot of all you can see and hear and feel, and just pack this into an impression and commit this to memory, and then come back to the room. Okay, so why are we doing this exercise? Well, in essence, it's a little demonstration. What we're doing here is we're imagining a future state of mind, a future experience. In this context, our future self is our user, and the beach holiday is our product or our solution. So in the exercise, we know ourselves fairly well. So we pretty much know how we're going to understand how we might think and feel when we're on a beach holiday. And yet, when we imagine our future experiences, or when we plan for our future, we're actually using the very skills we need within a design process. I have an empathy, or you have an empathy when you're doing this exercise, with your future self. We're able to mirror those thoughts and feelings of this other person. And we're able to do this because we understand the context. How do we understand our user's context? Well, in the same way that we were asking questions and painting an imaginary scene of our beach holiday, we can do very much the same to paint a picture of of our users. There are some questions here on the slide. You know, who is going to use our product? How will they use it? What are their hopes and goals? What are their expectations when they're engaging with our solution? Once we begin to understand those expectations, we can then factor those into our design. We can begin to see where our design may not be quite as intuitive as we first thought, and begin to make changes and improvements. But of course, there's another consideration here, because you or I, we can go through this process, we can understand our user's context. But what happens if we're working in a team? If I'm working in a team and I've done all this work, I understand all this context of the user, that information is in my head. We need some way of communicating. So how do we document thoughts and feelings for use in a design process? Well, the answer, obviously, and we alluded to this earlier, is essentially to start by creating archetypes, and then we move on with storyboards and journey maps. So, what's an archetype? So, here's another definition. An archetype or a persona, and I will circle back to what a persona and an archetype, how they differ a bit later, is a representation of a subset of our users. Well, okay, not terribly useful definition. We kind of understood that an archetype was going to be a representation of our users, but how should we subdivide our users? Is it by role or function? I mean, this might be a good start, because often this is how we define profiles or access to records. Often you'll find that someone who has the same role or works within the same department or function may be working to the same objectives. They might fit the same user story, but they may have very different expectations when it comes to adopting technology. Some might want to click on every button and look at everything so that they get the most out of your solution. Others might be very reluctant to adopt your solution. In terms of our external users, obviously we have to factor in our target audience, but again, here there may be a lot more, essentially, subdivisions that we need to make here. The end goal really here is to understand behavior and expectation. Once we understand that expectation, we can then begin to factor that in and improve our designs. And the best way we can define or discover our archetypes, because really we're discovering user behavior, is to ask questions. Who are they? What are they? What are their goals? What are they going to get out from this solution that we're designing? where and when might they use this product? If they are always going to use a product at a particular time of day, say first thing in the morning, they may be rushing on the morning commute, they may be accessing it on their mobile phone, in which case the context, the archetype that this person has, if they are always on the go, is going to be very different from if somebody is sat behind their desk after they've had their morning coffee and perhaps a little bit more relaxed. Their emotional state can play quite a factor here. So, archetypes and personas. Now, I use these terms fairly interchangeably, and I will do probably during the course of this session. That's not strictly true. If you see these things out in the wild, you probably notice that they are documented slightly differently. An archetype is normally documented with some kind of icon, a title, and something that describes or illustrates their behavior. Whereas a persona is a personification, an example of this archetype, and it's normally documented with a human face and a biography. Now, you will also find archetypes and personas used in other walks of life, in film, television, creative writing, literature, and psychology. In the last century, Carl Jung, a famous psychologist, discovered apparently 12 archetypes of human behavior that we all travel through during the course of our life. The hero archetype is one of those. We're now going to have a go at creating an archetype. So this should be a fun activity. Now I can see that we're all on tables. I know it says work in pairs, but it might be a good opportunity to work as a table. And I want you to come up with an archetype for essentially a target audience, a product that you are familiar with. So if you choose an everyday object or a children's toy, and then what I want you to have a go at is asking these questions, and think about chaining on your answers. So basically, one answer can lead to another question, which can lead to another question, which can essentially enrich your understanding of this particular target audience. So here's an example that I've created for you, one I created earlier, and this is based on one of Carl Jung's 12 archetypes. I would start essentially by looking at the goals. So in this hair gel example, essentially, yes, our archetype wants to look fabulous. Once we can perhaps understood this, we can then understand what behaviors they might have. We can begin to look at some adjectives or a short description. And then if we really have some time, we can come up with an image or an icon. Here are some questions that you might find useful when defining your archetype. What are their goals? What compels our user in this context to use this product? What are their demographics? Because that can come into play. Where and when will they use it? And of course, what might their likely emotional state be? Okay, so we're going to have 2 minutes. So if you can work in your tables and shout out if you need any assistance, but yeah. Okay, right. How did everyone get on? That's your 2 minutes. This was essentially supposed to be a bit of fun and essentially introduce you to the world of archetypes and obviously to see how far you can get within a very short space of time. Does any table feel like sharing how far they got?
We did go through behaviors of toothpaste.
Excellent, that sounds fascinating. Did you come up with a title for your archetype, or did you get that far, or we ran out of time? So you managed to get some goals and perhaps some behaviours? Excellent. Any other table? Catherine, yes, go ahead.
We came up with a book, a children's fictional book,
Mm-hmm.
And we had a behaviour of engaging curiosity, and that's as far as we got.
Excellent. I mean, that all sounds great. I think this essentially shows that you've got the knack of basically, the idea of essentially asking questions, generating an understanding of a target audience that is quite well known to you. Obviously, when it comes to your users, there's that you can work in a very similar way. Obviously, you wouldn't do it in 2 minutes. You'd take a little bit more time to do that. But essentially, within 2 minutes, it's a very very nice way of sort of easing you into this. Right. So we're going to move on from archetypes, and we're going to look at one of these. And this is an empathy map. Now, these are a fairly recent discovery that I had when I was researching this talk. And essentially, it's another way of understanding our user, and essentially a very illustrative way of showing our users or our archetypes. In the center there, obviously, we have something that represents our user or our archetype. Maybe if you've got the icon or a human face, essentially it goes there. And then in the quadrants around the side, these represent what the user might say, think, feel, and do. And these were invented to prevent miscommunication about target audiences. So in the same way, they're very good at sort of communicating essentially what type of archetype we're talking about when we're talking about a particular set of users. So, I mean, for example, often someone might say one thing and think privately about something else. A developer, for example, might complain about the coding language that they write in, but secretly they think it's a challenge. Likewise, sometimes often what we do doesn't always reflect particularly how we feel. So these are empathy maps. Right. Once we've understood the context of our users, and and perhaps we've created archetypes, personas, empathy maps to document this behavior, we can then move on to chart our users' journey through our solution. And we can do this in a couple of ways, with storyboards and journey maps. So a storyboard resembles a comic strip. It has a persona and a scenario. In this case, this is James, our corporate buyer, and he's going to replenish some office supplies. So you can see here that he's getting more, he finds that we need more Post-it notes. He goes back to his desks and he orders some more. So these are very good at illustrating a single task. And obviously why we do this is essentially to understand where we might make improvements in this particular journey. For example, if we wanted to give him a mobile phone here, he doesn't need to go back to his desk. If of course he can order it online from his mobile. The journey map is a little bit more sophisticated. Instead of a single task, we're mapping out an entire process. We still have a single goal, a scenario, and a specific user. And indeed, you probably, when you create a journey map, you really want to make sure that you're limiting it to one single user and scenario, because otherwise these things can get fairly messy quite quickly. Our journey is essentially split into 3 phases, and then within each phase there are tasks that the user might do. And what we can do then is we can annotate or put little speech bubbles essentially to represent how the user might be thinking or feeling when they're undertaking these tasks. And at the bottom there, essentially, at the bottom there is where we, no, it's not going to play ball. I think I've lost my circle. So at the bottom there is where we put our insights, the opportunities to make improvements, and who within the team is particularly going to own this. So we're going to look at a larger example of a journey map. And this is loosely based on a requirement I had earlier in the year about involving recruitment. Here our archetype is loosely based on a role, an assessor, and our goal here is to filter candidates for interview. We're going to review the candidates, send out a case study, and then the successful ones we'll invite for interview. Now you can see here that I've annotated these very simply with emojis. Now you can use heat maps, different colors to represent different emotions. And I've even got a speech bubble to suggest what might be the cause of their frustrations with this process. Now, for your journey maps, you might want to be a little bit more granular than I have here. I'm obviously using the sort of helicopter view to illustrate the point, but the more granular you can be with the tasks that the user is doing, essentially the more insights you're going to get back from your journey map. How granular? Well, that's up to you. You can be as granular as filling in a single form, or you can be as granular as a single field, or the action of finding a button on a page. Perhaps the button is in an unusual place, which confuses the user. Perhaps the language used in the field label is not quite up to scratch. And again, at the bottom here, we have our opportunities. So we can say, yes, we're going to replace all these manual steps. We're going to automate our emails and so on. And we can use these insights to write more further requirements. So if I'm not the one who's going to make these changes, I can hand off to my colleagues and they can iterate and improve our design. Validating our designs. So at a certain point during the development life cycle, you may want to obviously test your prototype, your solution. And here you may invite a set of users to come in and play around with the prototype. Ask them to perform specific parts within the user journey. Now, normally when we do this, little or no advice is given. We're testing the solution, the product, not the user in this case. And as they use the product, we ask them to articulate their thoughts and their feelings. And at the end of the interview, we might ask them, interview them, or get them to complete a survey. Obviously, this relies on having a physical user. So if you don't have a physical user, well, you can ask a colleague to do this. After all, we have archetypes, we have personas, we can get them to perhaps role play this. But in fact, we can go a step further than this. Because if you recall at the beginning when we did our exercise in imagination with the beach holiday, we committed the impression of our beach holiday to memory. And if you recall that now, you can probably find that you have all the detail that you packed into it when you were doing that exercise. And in the same way, when we create our archetypes and personas, when we understand our user's context, we can develop an idea of how our users might behave and thinking. So we can hold that impression, that idea in our minds, and when we are choosing elements that go in our design, we can ask ourselves a question. How would this user think? How would they feel if I had this particular component or this particular screen flow within my solution? We can validate as we go. Or to put it another way, we can design with imagination and empathy. Okay, before I do some summaries and then we move into questions, we're going to have a little bit of do's and don'ts for our design process. So we've talked a fair bit about archetypes and personas, and obviously there is perhaps some traps that you can fall into. So, and the circle's back. So, yeah, we're talking about categorizing people. So when we're creating archetypes and personas. So don't fall into the trap of using stereotypes or relying on assumptions. And again, the best way around this is to collaborate with colleagues, keep asking questions. We can go through the questions and find one idea of our user. Our colleagues may ask the same questions or slightly different questions and come to a different understanding. We can merge all that together and get a bigger picture of our user's context. On the do side, yes, we want to spend time in understanding the user expectation. Where are our solutions falling into a trap of not being as intuitive as we first thought? Invest time in honing your empathy. What do I mean here? It's like, well, in the days where we are training our AIs to be wonderful and great, don't forget to train your own mind. The human mind is a fantastic resource. It doesn't require subscription, doesn't cost you anything, but you do need to spend time in honing the skills within imagination and empathy. Ask yourself questions. That little question essentially around what would I, if I was this person, if I was this user, how would I think if I was interacting with this design? Share insights we've talked about. Yes, validate as we go. Because when we're choosing elements that go in our design, we can consider how the user are going to interact with them. And of course, success or failure is never really the final conclusion in our development lifecycle. We keep iterating, and we iterate our way towards happy experiences. So, in summary, I hope that you come away from today's session understanding that you do have many of the skills within imagination and empathy. We use them essentially when we're planning our own futures, when we're planning experiences for our colleagues, our families. And we can hone these skills essentially by creating documentation like archetypes and empathy maps. We can chart the progress of our users and understand essentially where the user is having some anxiety, where their pain points are within a particular user journey. And we can validate as we go. At the bottom here, you can see there are some further references and research. The first link there is an article I found on Carl Jung's 12 archetypes. And how it's used within marketing. Often in marketing, you use you identify a brand, and then you might build a brand around a particular archetype to attract more of that type of person that relates to it. That's a slightly different way of using archetypes. There's a consultancy group there, NN Group, who have a lot to say about user-centric design or human-centered design. And finally, a link to the Lightning Design System. Now, it was on the do's and don'ts. I forgot to tell you about adopting design principles. These are very useful because essentially is a way of changing user expectation. The more consistent your designs are, the clearer your designs are, the clearer the language you use. And you take time and effort to make things look nice on the page, your users are going to respect that, your solutions. And the next time they come and interact with a solution that is similar, consistent, perhaps you're using the same colors in a very consistent way, perhaps it's layout, and so on. Your users are then going to find that you're building the intuitiveness within your users. And that's a great way of building engaging experiences for your users. Okay, so I'm going to move into questions now. I think there were some that came through on the app. I can't hold my phone up because it's interfering with the mic. So if you did have a question that you wrote down on the app, please feel free to share that. Does anybody have any questions they'd like to ask? Do we have a microphone that might?
I'm just wondering if you could give me an example of something you've seen designed poorly without empathy. So there must be something that sticks in your head. It's God, this was terribly designed without the archetypes taken into account.
One of the things that springs to mind almost immediately is essentially a few years ago, before we moved to the Lightning experience, we had a homepage essentially which included a dashboard, and the dashboard was imported from another system, and that took about 10 seconds to load. So that was a poor experience because essentially we needed, we just lift and shifted this and we dumped it in there on the homepage. Users got had experienced a great deal of anxiety because they thought the page hadn't loaded, because essentially it was just the dashboard was just spinning around, not doing anything. Whereas Salesforce actually had loaded everything else, and here it was just sat in an iframe just spinning around. So that is a poor experience.
Why is it so important to take mood and feelings and all that into consideration, especially if you've got a lot of users? You're not going to please everybody.
That's true. Yeah, I think yes. I mean, in terms of what we mean by essentially the mood and the emotional state is really is trying to understand patterns within behaviour. So it's not a particular mood that one day you're in a mood. It's perhaps that we have patterns of behaviour, and within those patterns, essentially, we might want to identify, because those patterns of behaviour are going to identify just general patterns in their behaviour, but also how they might approach your solution. If they are, some people are very reluctant to accept with technology. So we need, and that might be a particular archetype that we could design around a reluctant user. Likewise, someone might be very eager, and they might want to click on every button, and in which case you have a number of archetypes within your user base, and it's basically trying to understand what their approach really to when they're adopting your solution. Sorry, does that answer the question?
Yeah, so basically it's to make it more user friendly for everyone.
Yes.
Just hearing that, would you put users into one archetype, or would they be a member of several archetypes? Because, for example, if you're doing reluctant users versus gung-ho, but also you're trying to do a different archetype,
yes.
different slice of it as well, could you have multiple that all play together?
Yes, I mean, I think essentially it relies on the user story, because obviously your user story is going to be a solution for a certain section of your user base in any case. It's different obviously for a home page that everybody can see, but in a scenario essentially where you're working with a certain section of people, they're already working perhaps towards one goal, like in our recruitment example, and they may be reluctant users, and they may they may have a certain set of, they may be set in their ways. They may want to download everything. And they're not happy with online solutions. So you can. I think. I mean, even as Carl Jung would say, in his 12 archetypes that he discovered a century ago, is that we will pass through several stages of an archetype, and we might start as a student, and then eventually we might become a caregiver, a mother, a father, a teacher, and there are lots of different archetypes that we might relate to, even during the course of perhaps a single day. So, I mean, we're not trying to pigeonhole people into it. What we're trying to understand is how will this user behave? What is their approach when it comes to what are they expecting? Because if your solution may meet all the requirements in your business requirements, but essentially if we've not tied down sort of some of their user expectation, then this is essentially where the disconnect is. Oh, I don't understand this. It doesn't work for me. I'd rather do something else. Yeah, we've all heard these. I think I forgot to put the stopwatch on, but I think there's someone at the back.
Just very quickly, going back to that user experience, if you're testing with a user and they're like, oh yeah, it's great, it's brilliant, it's wonderful, and then 6 months down the line you find out that there's one person that's not using it. Not that I'm speaking from experience. And any admins here, you've all been there. And I'm just like, how do you know that the user is being honest with you?
Yeah. Yes. I mean, yeah.
Because you're saying about the user experience and the moods and the empathy, and I get that. But when he looked at it, he was just like, click here, click here, click on the
Yeah, I mean, yeah, with the when you have a physical user and you're doing this sort of the user testing, and the contextual inquiry is quite important in that regard, because essentially you're getting them to articulate their thoughts and feelings as they go. Now, I've been in scenarios essentially where I know we're not supposed to be testing the user, we're testing the solution of how intuitive it is. But sometimes you will find that people will expose themselves as being not as literate or adoptive as perhaps you would expect them to be. And I think obviously in that scenario where maybe they're not, maybe they've said it's okay, yeah, I like the solution. And then later on, they're not adopting it. Perhaps we can address that in the questions that we're asking at the end. So we will have a short survey, and it's perhaps those questions which can be a little bit more tailored. Perhaps we can even ask a question: can you see yourself adopting this? Will this, will this stop you using this offline tool or whatever it is? Okay, I think I'm being waved at, so I think that's it. Thank you very much, guys.
MarCloud is marketing automation for Salesforce. Our team of certified professionals can lead you on your Sales Cloud, Marketing Cloud account engagement, and Marketing Cloud engagement journey. Implementation. At MarCloud, we can assist with new implementations and complex migrations. Templates and training courses. MarCloud offers on-demand training courses to help you on your Salesforce journey. Free account audit. Understand your platforms with our free account audit. Support with ad hoc projects. Manage and implement your Salesforce and Marketing Cloud goals on a one-off project basis. Ongoing consulting. Lean on MarCloud as an extension of your team during your Salesforce journey. Simply visit our website to learn more.